No one inside that gym expected history to pause that afternoon. The mirrors reflected movement, feet sliding across the floor, hands cutting through air. It was just another training session until it wasn't. Bruce Lee stood relaxed, breathing steady, eyes sharp with focus. Across from him stood Chuck Norris, quiet, composed. They weren't arguing. They weren't competing. At least not yet. Bruce moved first. Fast, clean, almost effortless. He stepped back, a faint smirk forming on his face. Too slow. The words weren't loud. They weren't angry. But the room reacted instantly. A few students chuckled. Others shifted uncomfortably. Because something about that moment felt wrong. Chuck Norris didn't laugh. He didn't defend himself. Didn't explain. Didn't respond. He simply looked at Bruce, calm, still, almost patient. And that silence did something strange. The energy tightened. Not explosive, not dramatic. Just heavy. Because confidence usually expects resistance. And when it doesn't get it, it starts to doubt itself. Bruce noticed. The smirk lingered, but not as easily as before. Two men stood facing each other. One known for speed that seemed unreal. The other known for discipline that never cracked. Everyone expected a challenge. Everyone expected a clash. What they didn't expect was this. No punches would be thrown. No voices would be raised. Yet by the end of that day, both men would walk away changed. Not because of a fight. But because of what they discovered about control, ego, and the moment when speed meets something that doesn't move. Have you ever seen a moment that felt quiet, but somehow heavier than noise? At first, nothing about that day felt unusual. The gym carried its usual rhythm, the soft thud of bare feet against the mat, controlled breathing, the faint squeak of shoes shifting for balance. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, catching dust in the air like drifting sparks. Students moved through drills with focus. Some trained in silence. Others whispered advice to one another between rounds. And at the center of it all stood two men who, to the outside world, represented entirely different paths to mastery. Bruce Lee was motion. He flowed even when standing still. Every step felt intentional, every movement alive. His confidence wasn't loud, it was natural, earned through endless refinement and belief in his own philosophy. To many in the room, he wasn't just a martial artist. He was the future. Chuck Norris was something else entirely. Where Bruce moved like water, Chuck stood like stone. His posture never collapsed. His breathing stayed even. Years of competition had carved discipline into him so deeply that it no longer looked forced. He didn't perform strength. He carried it. The students noticed the contrast immediately. Bruce demonstrated speed, showing how hesitation created openings. His strikes stopped inches from targets, precise and controlled. Each motion came with explanation, efficiency, adaptability, freedom from rigid forms. Chuck watched quietly from the side. He didn't interrupt, didn't correct, didn't challenge. Not because he lacked confidence, but because he believed observation revealed more than argument ever could. To him, mastery wasn't something proven in moments. It was revealed over time. There was no rivalry between them that day, no hostility, only curiosity. Students whispered quietly. What happens if they train together? Whose style is better? Could speed really overcome structure? But neither man fed those questions. They spoke respectfully. They listened when the other explained. From the outside, it looked like harmony. Yet beneath the calm, something subtle was forming. Because when two masters share the same space, comparison becomes unavoidable. Bruce's approach challenged tradition. Chuck's presence represented it. Neither was wrong, but both were certain. And certainty, when shared between equals, creates pressure, even without intention. The room didn't feel tense yet. It felt expectant, like something unfinished waited quietly between movements. No one could point to it. No one could name it. But the atmosphere held that strange stillness that comes right before a shift, the kind that only makes sense afterward. At that moment, it was still just a training session, still calm, still controlled. No raised voices, no conflict, just two philosophies standing a few feet apart, waiting for the moment that would test them both. It began the way most turning points do, quietly. A simple exchange during training. Bruce demonstrated a quick combination, moving forward with sharp precision, his hands snapping through the air before stopping inches from his partner's chest. The movement was clean, efficient, almost effortless. A few students nodded in admiration. Speed, Bruce said calmly, wiping his hands on a towel. If you're faster than the thought, the body can't react. Chuck listened from a few steps away. He didn't disagree. He didn't agree either. One of the students asked a question about timing, about whether anticipation could matter as much as movement itself. Bruce smiled. Timing matters, he said, but speed decides. Then he turned toward Chuck, not confrontational, not aggressive, just casual. Want to try? The room leaned in without realizing it. They stepped onto the mat. No challenge had been spoken, yet everyone felt one forming. Bruce moved first, fast enough that most eyes barely followed it. A light tap near Chuck's shoulder, controlled and respectful, stopping short. Bruce stepped back with a small grin. Too slow. The words floated out lightly, almost playful. A couple of students laughed. Others didn't, because tone matters more than volume. And that tone carried certainty. Chuck didn't respond. He nodded once, acknowledging the movement. No excuse, no explanation. That should have been the end of it. But confidence, once rewarded with laughter, rarely stops there. Bruce moved again, quicker this time. Another clean entry, another controlled stop. Again he stepped back, still too slow. The laughter didn't come this time. The room felt different now, tighter, quieter, alert. Not because anyone feared violence, but because respect had been brushed aside. Chuck remained calm. He adjusted his stance slightly, not defensive, observational. Bruce noticed, and instead of stepping away, he tilted his head, studying him. "You're waiting," Bruce said lightly. "But waiting makes you late." It wasn't meant to insult. But it did, because it reduced years of discipline into hesitation. A few students glanced at Chuck, unsure how he would react. Some expected a rebuttal. Others expected a challenge. Chuck gave neither. He simply said, "Go again." Bruce raised an eyebrow, amused. He moved fast, sharp, confident. This time Chuck shifted just barely, enough to avoid the touch. Bruce stopped mid-motion. The smirk faded for a fraction of a second. It returned quickly, but it wasn't the same. "Almost," Bruce said. The word hung heavier than the others, because it wasn't about technique anymore. It was about perception. The room felt that shift instantly. No one laughed now. No one spoke. They weren't watching speed anymore. They were watching pride. Bruce exhaled slowly, still calm, still composed, but now engaged. Chuck remained silent, not because he lacked a response, but because he understood something Bruce didn't yet realize. Speed invites reaction. Stillness invites exposure. The tension between them wasn't hostile. It was unfinished, like a question asked twice and left unanswered. And everyone in the gym could feel it. The moment had crossed from demonstration to something else. Something quieter, something sharper. Something that couldn't be undone with another smile. Because once respect wavers, the room never feels the same again. The gym had gone quiet. Not the awkward kind of silence, but the kind that presses gently against the skin, the kind that makes every breath sound louder than it should. Chuck Norris stood where he was, hands relaxed at his sides. He felt the eyes on him, students, instructors, observers who moments earlier had been relaxed, now watching as if something important was about to be decided. He could feel the expectation. They wanted a response. They wanted speed met with speed. Ego answered with ego. That's how moments like this usually went. But Chuck didn't move. Not because he was uncertain, but because he was thinking. Years of tournaments had taught him something most people never learn: the fastest reaction is rarely the best one. He had stepped into countless rings before, where hesitation meant defeat. But this wasn't a ring. There were no judges, no bell, no winner waiting to be announced. This was something else. He studied Bruce carefully. Not just his hands, but his breathing. Not just his stance, but his rhythm. Bruce stood loose, spring-loaded, full of confidence. Every motion was alive, expressive, brilliant. Chuck respected that. He truly did. But he also saw what speed sometimes hid: gaps. Not physical ones, psychological ones. Because speed depends on certainty. And certainty depends on belief that nothing will interrupt it. Chuck knew that if he reacted now, if he rushed to answer the smirk, the comments, the quiet laughter, he would be stepping into Bruce's world. And whoever fights inside another man's rhythm has already lost something. Across from him, Bruce shifted slightly. He noticed the calm, the lack of resistance, the refusal to play along, and that unsettled him more than any counter ever could have. Confidence feeds on reaction. Silence starves it. Chuck remembered his early days, the pressure of proving himself, the hunger to show he belonged. He remembered how easy it was to confuse dominance with validation. He had outgrown that. Bruce hadn't done anything wrong. Not truly. But the moment had drifted from learning into measuring, and measuring turns masters into competitors. Chuck could feel the choice forming inside him. Respond now and turn this into a contest. Or wait and let the truth reveal itself naturally. Waiting takes courage, because when you wait, you surrender control of the moment. Most people can't tolerate that. Bruce's eyes studied him again. "You're patient," Bruce said casually, "but patience won't save you from speed." The words weren't sharp, but they carried weight. A few students shifted nervously. This was the moment. Chuck felt it. The invisible line between restraint and response. He could demonstrate now. He could show timing. He could end the whispers. But then what? A victory with witnesses, or a lesson without noise? He lowered his gaze briefly, not in submission but reflection. He thought of discipline not as a weapon, but as responsibility, because power revealed carelessly becomes ego, and ego always asks for more. Slowly, Chuck raised his eyes again. He met Bruce's stare. Calm, unprovoked, unmoved. "I'm not trying to be faster than you," he said evenly. The room leaned in. "I'm trying to understand you." The words landed differently than a challenge ever could have. Bruce blinked. Just once. Because that wasn't the response he expected, not defensive, not competitive, human. For a moment, neither man spoke. The tension didn't break. It transformed. Bruce felt it too, though he wouldn't admit it yet. This wasn't about speed anymore. It was about perspective. About two paths leading toward the same summit, approaching from opposite sides. Chuck felt something settle inside him. He had chosen not to win a moment, so that something deeper could unfold. Because mastery isn't proven when you're watched. It's revealed when you refuse to perform. The gym remained silent, not uncomfortable, respectful. Everyone sensed it now, the shift beneath the surface. Whatever happened next would not be loud, but it would matter, and both men knew it. The quiet didn't fade. It lingered. Not because anyone was uncomfortable, but because something meaningful had begun unfolding, and no one wanted to interrupt it. Bruce shifted his stance slightly, rolling his shoulders once, as if resetting his body. "You want to understand me," he said, his tone calm but sharper than before. "Understanding comes from movement, from testing." Chuck nodded slowly. "I agree," he said, "but testing doesn't always mean pushing harder." Bruce smiled again, smaller this time. "Then how do you find truth without pressure?" That question changed the room, because it wasn't about technique anymore. It was philosophy. Bruce believed pressure revealed reality. Strip comfort away and truth appears. Chuck believed patience did the same, not by forcing answers, but by allowing them to surface naturally. Two beliefs, neither wrong, but neither willing to bend easily. Bruce stepped forward again, not attacking, just closing distance. "When you hesitate," he said, "you give control away." Chuck didn't step back. "When you rush," he replied, "you give information away." A few students exchanged glances. This wasn't training now. It was dialogue in motion. Bruce circled lightly, his feet barely touching the mat. Every movement carried intention, speed coiled and ready. Chuck remained planted, weight centered, breathing steady. Stillness versus motion. Energy built, not outwardly but inwardly. Bruce moved suddenly, not to strike, but to test range. His hand cut toward Chuck's shoulder again, stopping short. Fast, precise. Chuck shifted just enough. Not quick, correct? Bruce pulled back, eyes narrowing slightly. "That's timing," Chuck said calmly, "not speed." Bruce exhaled through his nose, amused. "Timing without speed dies," he replied. "And speed without timing runs into walls," Chuck answered. No one laughed now. No one whispered. The gym felt like it was holding its breath. Bruce took a step back, studying Chuck with new attention. For the first time, he wasn't smiling for others, he was thinking. He moved again, faster this time, not aggressive, but probing, like a question delivered through motion. Chuck responded again, minimal, efficient, unflashy. Not to dominate, to demonstrate restraint. Bruce stopped, completely. Silence returned.
"Not tense."
"Focused. You don't chase," Bruce said quietly. "No," Chuck replied. "I let things come to me." Bruce nodded slowly. He had built his philosophy on intercepting, overwhelming, flowing forward. Yet here stood a man who refused to be pulled into that current. And it intrigued him, because resistance could be overcome. But calm was harder to break. "You're not slow," Bruce said at last. The words mattered. They weren't praise. They were correction. Chuck inclined his head slightly. "And you're not reckless," he said. That surprised Bruce. The edge between them softened, just slightly. But the pressure hadn't disappeared. It had matured. They stood there, two masters circling the same truth from different sides. The students sensed it too. This wasn't about who would win. It was about who would adapt. Bruce inhaled deeply. "Show me," he said, not as a challenge, as a request. The room leaned forward again, because now something had changed. The smirk was gone. The ego quieted. What remained was curiosity, and curiosity, when shared by two masters, is far more dangerous than rivalry. Whatever came next wouldn't be loud, wouldn't be dramatic, but it would decide the moment. The room felt smaller now. Not because anyone had moved closer, but because attention had narrowed to a single space between two men standing on the mat. Bruce's request hung in the air. "Show me." There was no arrogance in it anymore, only focus. Chuck didn't respond right away. He inhaled slowly, then exhaled, the same breath he'd taken thousands of times before competition, before pressure, before moments that demanded clarity. He stepped forward, not fast, not slow, intentional. Bruce adjusted his stance instinctively, muscles alive, ready for speed. But Chuck didn't rush him. He didn't chase motion. He waited. Bruce shifted, a faint twitch of the shoulder, a subtle transfer of weight. Chuck moved, not explosively, perfectly. He didn't strike. He didn't grab. He simply stepped into the space Bruce was about to occupy. Their arms met briefly, not with force, but alignment. Bruce felt it instantly. Not pain, not resistance. Understanding. His forward momentum disappeared, not stopped, not blocked, redirected into nothing. He blinked, surprised. Chuck stepped back immediately. No follow-through. No dominance. Just clarity. The room stayed silent. Bruce exhaled slowly, a short laugh escaping him before he could stop it. Again, he said. This time he moved first, faster, sharper, a blur of intention. Chuck read the rhythm, not the speed, and shifted again. The same result. No clash, no collision, just absence. Bruce straightened, hands resting lightly on his hips. His expression had changed completely now. No smirk, no performance, only respect forming in real time. "You're not reacting," Bruce said quietly. "You're arriving before I do." Chuck nodded. "I'm not trying to beat you to the moment," he said. "I'm meeting it." That sentence settled deep, because it explained everything. Bruce walked a slow circle, processing what he had just felt. Speed had always been his language, a way to overwhelm expectation, to live ahead of resistance. But what Chuck showed him wasn't opposition. It was anticipation without hurry, control without stiffness. Bruce stopped in front of him again. "Most people chase speed," Bruce said. "I thought that made them free." Chuck considered his words. "Speed gives freedom," he replied. "Discipline tells you where to use it." No one spoke. Not because they were afraid, because they were learning. Bruce bowed his head slightly, not formally, not dramatically. Then he smiled again. But this time it wasn't playful. It was genuine. "I see it now," he said softly. The tension that had filled the room since the first, too slow, finally dissolved. Not with noise, with understanding. Students relaxed their shoulders without realizing it. Breathing returned to normal. The gym felt larger again. Bruce extended his hand. Chuck took it. The handshake was brief, firm, mutual. No victory had been claimed. No ego satisfied, yet somehow both men had gained something. Bruce turned to the students. He said, his expression. Then he glanced at Chuck. "But timing is wisdom." Chuck added quietly, "And wisdom tells you when not to use either." A few students nodded slowly, absorbing the moment. They hadn't witnessed a fight. They had witnessed mastery correcting itself. Bruce stepped back onto the mat, energized, not diminished. Chuck returned to his place unchanged, yet understood more deeply. Nothing dramatic had happened. And yet everything had. Because the most powerful lessons don't arrive with impact, they arrive with clarity. And clarity, once felt, cannot be unseen. The gym slowly returned to its rhythm. Students resumed their drills, though nothing felt quite the same anymore. Movements were quieter now, more deliberate, as if everyone carried a little more awareness in their bodies than they had an hour earlier. Bruce sat on the edge of the mat, towel draped over his shoulders, staring at the floor. Not tired, thinking. He replayed the moment again and again, not the movement itself, but the feeling, the absence of resistance, the way speed had vanished into calm. For someone who had spent his life mastering motion, that realization lingered deeply. Chuck packed his bag nearby, methodical as ever. No celebration, no acknowledgement from others. He hadn't come to teach a lesson, only to train. Yet lessons have a way of appearing when ego steps aside. Bruce finally looked up. "You know," he said almost to himself, "people think speed is about being first." Chuck paused. He listened. "I used to think that too," Bruce continued. "That if I arrived before my opponent, I controlled everything." Chuck nodded once. "And today?" he asked. Bruce smiled faintly. "Today I realized control doesn't rush." They sat in silence for a moment, not awkward, not strained. Comfortable. The kind of silence that only appears after something honest has happened. Bruce stood and bowed his head slightly again, deeper this time, intentional. "Thank you," he said. Chuck returned the nod. "For showing me something I wasn't looking for." Chuck replied simply. "That's usually how it happens." They went their separate ways shortly after. No announcement, no witnesses gathered, no story told loudly. But stories like this don't need volume, they travel quietly. Over time, people would talk, not about who was faster or who would have won, but about the day two masters chose understanding over competition. Bruce carried that moment forward. He refined his philosophy, not abandoning speed but grounding it. Expression, yes, but guided by awareness. Chuck carried the moment differently. It reinforced what he already believed. That discipline isn't limitation, it's clarity. Years later, when students spoke of greatness, they rarely mentioned that day directly, but its echo lived in every lesson about patience. Every reminder that mastery isn't proven by domination, it's proven by restraint, because real strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand validation. It doesn't need an audience. Real strength listens. It adapts, and when necessary, it waits. That's the part most people never learn. In a world obsessed with speed, noise, and reaction, patience looks like weakness. Silence looks like surrender. Stillness looks like fear. Until the moment comes when nothing else works, and the one who waited steps forward, not to impress, not to conquer, but to resolve. That day in the gym wasn't about Bruce Lee losing, and it wasn't about Chuck Norris winning. It was about something rarer. Two men strong enough to let ego fall away. Two paths crossing not to collide but to realign. That's why the story endured. Not because of violence, but because it showed what mastery truly looks like when no one is trying to prove anything. And maybe that's the lesson that matters most. That the loudest voice isn't always the strongest. That the fastest movement isn't always the most effective. And that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is not react at all. More powerful stories like this are coming. If any part of this moment stood out to you, whether it was the silence, the lesson, or the shift in perspective, share it in the comments. Your feedback helps shape what we create next, because the best stories